Well, we have an interesting gospel this morning about Herod Antipas, if you will, and John the Baptist. As I was doing my reading, it was interesting to read what the historian Josephus had to say about this whole incident. And as I continued to read and study, one of the questions I always ask myself, so what is it we are to learn from this gospel? Here we have Herod, who really, in a sense, likes John the Baptist, if you will. He likes to listen to him preach. He's perplexed by his preaching. Really has nothing against him. Even though he went to Herod and told him he was wrong to marry his brother's wife. Yes, Catherine said, well, I thought that was what they did in those days. I said, well, yes, if the brother died. There is a slight difference. So we have Herod and Herodias, and really it was Herodias that had it in for John the Baptist. She took what John had said and she wouldn't let it go. She hung on to that and she became bitter and angry. So, we're told, I think she waited for her opportunity to get even with John for what he had said, even though he was right. So Herod has himself a birthday bash and invites all kinds of people. And they would have been, the leaders of the day. And not just the leaders of the day, but friends and family and all sorts of people. They would have had a huge celebration. And in that celebration, Herodias' daughter danced for Herod. Now, we're really not told what kind of dance it was that she did. But there's some I say, people who think it was rather sexual, if you will. So, we don't know, but that's the reality. But whatever kind of dance it was that she did for Herod, he was really taken in by it. And he said to her, he was so pleased that he would give her anything, even up to half of his kingdom. That would have been a lot. But when Salome asked Herodias what she should ask for, Herodias didn't even have to think about that one. She said, the head of John the Baptist, on a platter, no less. So, that's what she asked for. And even if Herod didn't want to do that, he wasn't going to make himself look like a fool after making a promise in front of all of those people and then not follow through. So he did her bidding. So in this story, what do you suppose, or how do you suppose, we can relate it to our lives today? We have Herod, who very foolishly makes a promise that I think in my heart of hearts he really didn't want to fulfill. But because he had made a promise, he couldn't go back on his promise. We have Herodias, who was very angry and bitter. How many times, I wonder, has someone pointed out to us something that we're doing wrong? And how many times have we kind of went, yeah, right. I don't need to listen to you. I know better. So we're all kind of not exempt from that. Maybe it's a flaw in us, that we don't like to hear people tell us we're wrong. Or we don't like to have people call us on our behavior. Because in our heart of hearts, we're right. Or at least we think we are. And even if down deep inside we have an inkling that perhaps we're not right, it's hard to admit. It's hard to admit that we make mistakes. How many times has someone done something to you to wound you badly? And you carry a grudge, if you will. You carry that inside of you and you think, one of these days, I'm going to get even. One of these days, you just wait and see. You'll be sorry. And that was Herodias. One of these days, John, you're going to be sorry for what you did to me. So that's another one of our flaws we struggle with, is forgiveness. Forgiveness when we've been hurt. People hurt us. Sometimes even unknowingly people hurt us, or we hurt each other. And if we don't know that we've done it, that's one thing. But if we do know that we've hurt someone, it's up to us to make amends. Remember, offer strawberry. How often have you been in a position where you've been in a group of people and you know that what they're talking about is wrong, that you really don't want to be part of that conversation, but you're hesitant to get up and say anything? You're afraid of what your peers may say to you. I don't know whether I've shared this story with you before. However, I think it bears telling again. When I was in seminary, part of our field education was going to the Health Science Centre, the London Health Science Centre, the hospital there, huge hospital. And we would go there once a week and do visiting. And as part of that visiting, the group of students would meet afterwards with our supervisor to discuss our visits. Not to discuss the people that we had visited with, but to discuss what our experience of doing those visits was like. And quite often, as happens in groups, we would often get off topic. And at that particular time, Huron had introduced a new program for field education called Transcultural Experiences. So for people who didn't want to do what we call a CPE, a clinical pastoral education course, which is 4 months in the hospital, they had the option of doing a transcultural experience. So one of our students was going way down to the border of Mexico, where it meets the U.S., and they were doing a border ministry because a lot of people were trying to get across the border, and it was very dangerous. And they lived out in the wild. Another one of our students was going to Newfoundland for a transcultural experience. because she had been born and raised in the city of Windsor and had no idea of what rural ministry was about. And another one of our students was going to Walpole Island to be with the First Nations community. And when he said that he was doing his experience with the First Nations people, someone in the group piped up and said, "Are you going to live in a teepee?" And someone else said, "Are you going to wear a loincloth?" And I could feel the heat in me rising. My girlfriend was sitting across the table from me, and I think her face was almost as red as mine. And finally I said, oh, the other piece of that story that's interesting is that the supervisor became involved in that conversation. So finally I said, okay, I need to tell you, this is making me uncomfortable. You're stereotyping, and that's wrong. You could hear a pin drop. And I have to say, until this day, whenever I meet that priest, he still apologizes to me. Sometimes we get caught up in things that we know are wrong. It takes a lot of courage to stand up to our peers and say, that's wrong. What you're doing is wrong, and I'm not going to be part of it. I wonder how many people at that birthday party wanted to stand up and say, Herod, what you're doing is wrong. I wonder how many of them feared for their lives if they did. But when you think about it, today's world isn't so much different than it was then. We still have Christians being beheaded simply because they're Christians. We still have young women being taken advantage of for all kinds of things. And we still have groups of people who stereotype and label other people in our society. So when I sat with this, that's what I came away with from this gospel. How many times we need to look in the mirror. We need to look in the mirror and say, yes, I'm not perfect and I know it. I'm sure there's times when I've hurt people, and for that I am sorry. I'm sure there's times even I have not been brave enough to stand up in the face of a group of people and say, that's wrong. That's wrong what you're doing, and I don't agree with it. However, when we do that, we feel good. Not only do we feel good about ourselves because we've stood up for something that we believe in, we feel good because hopefully we've educated others. We've educated others because sometimes people do it without even thinking. They don't realize that they're hurting people. It's like if I hurt someone, unless I do it intentionally, which I wouldn't, if they don't tell me, how do I know? So the important thing to remember, I believe, is that when we stand up for what we believe in, when we go out those doors and preach the gospel, when we teach, we're not alone. We're not alone because God goes with us. We had such a wonderful teacher in Jesus. All we have to do is emulate his life. And does it mean that we're going to be crucified by times? Absolutely. But remember, Jesus gave his life for us. And for that I say, thanks be to God. Amen.